This is the London Fintech Podcast, brought to you by your host, Mike Ballerman, bridging the worlds of suits and t-shirts, of finance and technology, bringing you insights, stories, and inspiration from the golden age of opportunity and innovation happening in London right now.
Hi, this is Mike Ballerman, and this is London Fintech Podcast, episode 99, brought to you in association with Blue Motor Finance and Smart Pension. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Jimmy Williams, CEO of Urban Jungle, which perhaps sounds like a fashion label, but is actually an Insuretech focusing on the renting generation, who is here today to talk about how to partner well. In the first wave of finteching, we saw plenty of fintechs busy creating product and creating distribution. Nothing wrong with that, you might say. Sounds like a business. Indeed. However, when time to market is a factor, then paring down everything really helps. Plus, isn't there some idea that you should focus on what you're really great at rather than trying to be good at everything? Well, in Insuretech, as we've heard in a few recent examples, it's becoming easier to plug into insurance/reinsurance capacity and avoid all that tedious back-end insurance-y stuff. Equally, there are plenty of app-only banks, to pick one key sector, which have gained many clients and are desperate to flog them something other than a current account for nothing in order to do that most retro of things, make a profit. Which leads us to the topic du jour, partnering. I wonder whether I need to bookend this sometime with one unconscious uncoupling. Back in my day, things were different. No swiping left or is it right. In fact, you didn't even have to get your hair cut, and there were no smart clothes at all. As to girls, well, at the height of the punk revolution, it was clearly shown that even if you turn up in a bin liner, the boys would still be all over you. Can't stop those teenage hormones. So what does a fintech do to look presentable? Wear a red dress, wear a bin liner, swipe left or is it right, spend time at the gym? I wouldn't know, but fortunately, Jimmy is the man who does. Or rather, allegedly. Let's see. Sound biting sounds like an S&M practice, but it's something to do with the modern world of memes and tweets and attention spans slightly shorter than an average sentence. Jimmy has clearly got this biting thing off to a fine art and tells me he has 6 secrets of successful partnering. And no, it's not one of those off-piste episodes. I do mean in the corporate sense, sadly. But don't worry. In next time's episode, LFP100, I'll report on speaking to over 24 leading fintech CEOs on topics such as power, betrayal, plotting, deceit. All shall be revealed. In the meantime, plenty to talk about, so let's get on with the show. Hi Jimmy, thanks for joining me today.
Hi Mike, thanks very much for having me. I'm a bit of a podcast nut. I've listened to the show quite a lot, so it's really nice to be on.
Oh, excellent. I like podcast nuts, as you call it, actually. It's still, in the UK, a relatively niche thing, but those people into podcasts listen to quite a few.
Yeah, I just find it's one of those things you can do very easily when you're commuting or travelling around town that doesn't consume too much energy, but you can learn an awful lot. So it's been something I've been done for quite a while. Yes,
it's very hard to learn anything really from the mainstream media, so I get most of my stuff from indie media. I don't know how you find it, but the challenge I find with podcasting is this discoverability hasn't been conquered. So I used to listen for quite some time to the MotoGP podcast by BT Sport, which was a bit mainstream media. You know, they didn't want to upset the powers that be. They were a little bit bland. They sort of alluded to stuff but didn't discuss it. And then completely by chance, via Twitter actually this week, I came across the Paddock Pass podcast. Right, which is one of the Motoring Magazine's podcasts. Listened to one episode and it was brilliant. It was far more insightful and incisive. But I think that people tend to stumble across podcasts.
I think that's right. I think every podcast I listen to, I've been recommended by a friend. I don't think I've ever discovered a podcast. And I think that's partly because the apps are so terrible. So I'm on iPhone and the podcast app on iPhone is terrible. You can only find things if you really know what you're looking for.
Yes, and I think part of the challenge is that real human beings, unlike all these algorithms in YouTube and Twitters and Facebooks, real human beings can be interested in a whole bunch of absolutely unconnected stuff that no algorithm's ever going to work out. No algorithm will, it might suggest fintech podcasts for me or something, or marketing podcasts. Well, I don't need those anymore, but I want a MotoGP one. And equally, it's not just a question of the topic. As much as anything, I want to listen to a podcast that's listenable to. I'd like to hear an interesting podcast on a topic I'm not so interested in, as opposed to a boring podcast on a topic I'm interested in.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge with all sorts of media at the moment, is you end up, because of social media, in your bubble, and it's very easy just to get thrown the same thing again and again, whereas actually the benefit of the kind of mainstream old school media was you opened the newspaper and it wrote about whatever was written about, not what your friends had pre-filtered.
Exactly, and you had curated content on a whole variety of topics, which gave you the breadth which is missing. Good. Okay, now talking of missing breath, I was saying to you beforehand that I've had a run of people talking to me about their holidays all the time, and you were saying you were just listening to Nigel Verdon's holiday in Costa Rica. And I said, well, hopefully you've got something different, but you didn't. So let's start with your holidays as well, actually.
Yeah, so I was asking the team before I kind of come up what story I should talk about. And they told me that my most interesting story was about when I rescued 7 vicars on the side of a mountain in Uganda a couple of years back. We had the great fortune a couple of years back of driving from London to Capetown in our own car. It's a very long way. And on the way there, we went via Uganda, went into the windy impenetrable national forest to visit the gorillas. And it's my very strong advice that if you go to Uganda, you don't drive at night. And we were just arriving in the national park.
Because? Animals or
animals,
baddies?
Other people who don't have lights on their car, in some cases bandits who are very near the Congolese border. And my wife was very upset with me that we didn't exactly know where we were going, and I was kind of getting it in the ear. And we kind of round the corner and we find a vehicle that's completely stuck miles and miles from the nearest town. And then we kind of get there and realise that actually it's a big estate car and being driven by 7 vicars who'd just been preaching in the local village and were kind of going on to their next show. And they were completely stuck, and we were the only car anywhere for probably 50, 60 miles. So we quickly towed them out with our big car, and they blessed the rest of our trip for us. I'm very happy with being rescued, which is quite a fun travel story.
Oh, brilliant. And did their blessing work?
Well, we didn't have any big problems along the way. Certainly going through Africa could be fairly hairy, but we certainly had no bad experience in the whole trip. So maybe it did work.
And I always like to share useful consumer advice for the listeners. So how do you drive from London to Cape Town?
So you drive to Turkey, you get a ferry from Turkey to Egypt, and then you kind of hug the eastern side of Africa. That's the way we went.
And how long does that take then?
We did it in about 4 months.
Okay.
But we didn't rush.
Well, that's what I call a holiday.
Yeah.
Did you have to drive all the way back?
We actually left the car there and we'd go back and visit it for several years afterwards.
Oh, wow. How cool. Good. Okay, so that's this week's part of the Fintech Travel podcast. And in terms of a journey of a different nature, you were telling me on the way up that in terms of your career journey, you made some very helpful friends with the benefit of lots of hindsight in your early days of your career. So how did you get from there to here?
Yeah, so like any slightly aimless graduate, didn't know what they wanted to do. I ended up in management consulting at a company called AC&C, and it just happened that kind of amongst my close cohort of people I joined the firm with and were kind of there in the early days, there have been quite a few successful fintech entrepreneurs. So the 2 most notable being James Meekings, who went off to start Funding Circle, which has obviously been very successful.
Done quite well, hasn't it?
It's done very well, and he's actually one of our investors, which is great, and he was one of our first investors. And also Tom Blomfield, who obviously left to do Go Cardless, but has since done Starling and Monzo. So certainly when you're at that kind of stage of your career and you're thinking, ooh, am I going to start a business in a regulated industry? That sounds all a bit scary. When you've got 2 people you know reasonably well who've gone and done it quite successfully, that's quite encouraging.
And in terms of your angel investors, another one who's been on the show this year was Jonathan Quinn, I believe, as well.
Yes, that's right.
So you've obviously either got a very good business or a good line in spiel and mugging them.
Probably some sort of mixture of the both, I suspect, yeah.
Ah, excellent. And it's quite a strange thing, really, in terms of so many people from your early incarnation then cropped up in a later stage. I did notice, actually, when I was talking to Funding Circle, I think in early fintech, there was quite a tendency for management consultancy types to form it, probably because they were quite good at looking at the market and identifying gaps and yardy and telling other people what to do. But I rather wonder whether more recently there's quite a tendency for more FSE types to be involved in it, which may well be because it's the usual thing. Somebody might think, let's have sex.com, and anybody can do sex.com, but by the time you've niched down, you're into some small area like Nigel Verdon last week. It's a very technical thing to do sort of 5 lines of code to connect you to global banking. That's not so management consultancy. That really relies on somebody knowing how the drains and all that kind of stuff under buildings works in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think with the Funding Circle guys particularly, if it had been now, so this was back in 2008, I think, when they left, James left, none of them is a technology guy, none of them is a coder. And actually, if it was 2018 and not 2008, they probably wouldn't have been able to raise any money for that business and would have had a really hard time because they were all management consultants. Yeah, it's interesting. I think particularly because it's a small kind of slightly cheeky challenger firm, there is a culture of lots of entrepreneurship, and so perhaps more than average there are entrepreneurs leaving to go and start businesses. But who knows whether the industry expert or the management consultant will do better. We'll see perhaps long term.
Absolutely. Well, it keeps me busy chatting to them all. So moving on from the background to why you're here, we'll come back to Urban Jungle later. I was quite impressed by your less than 1 minute YouTube, which explained things simply and clearly. I wish every guest firm that I'm not so familiar with had such a thing, because it would save a lot of time myself. And you can talk about that maybe a little bit later. It's actually easier said than done to do a nice, simple, clear thing, which sort of, is nice and visual, and you get it straight away, and you can sort of remember it for weeks afterwards. But on to the topic then about how you make yourself partnerable. He says, looking over the table and noticing that you've got a wedding ring, so you've obviously managed to do that in one dimension of your life.
That's right.
But maybe we'll gloss over your sort of secrets of seduction.
Or more the secrets of persuading your wife that you should be allowed to leave your well-paying job to start a business.
We should do a podcast on that, actually. How to get your partner to tolerate an entrepreneurial lifestyle. So in terms of making a fintech, an Insuretech, it doesn't really matter, partnerable, as I mentioned, you had some structured ideas around this. Leading into those, maybe you'll just tell us a little bit about how being partnerable is or isn't important to you guys. I mean, do you see yourselves as primarily developing a retail channel, as it were, on the one hand, to the renting generation? Or on the other hand, are you really sort of trying to be a white label thing? Or are you, as quite often is the case in Insuretech in early days, trying to do both and just seeing what works better kind of thing?
So if I'm going to pick one of your three, it's probably the last one of those. And so quite early on, when we were setting up the business, we kind of appreciated that one of the biggest challenges of starting an insurance business was going to be about distribution and trying to tell customers about what it was we were doing. And quite famously, acquisition in insurance is very expensive. So the stats from the US, but insurance is the most expensive keyword on Google. So it's about $54 a click.
Wow. $54 a click?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that is about 25% more than the second most, which happens to be loans for all you financial services people out there. That channel was not going to be as open to us as it might be open to other people. So we thought about actually what kind of assets we had as a business. And one thing we did have quite strongly was a revenue model. So you by law can't sell insurance for free. That model of giving away things of value for free had been the growth model of lots of businesses. So the most pertinent recent example is all of the neo or app-only banks giving away international transactions for free, which obviously led to loads of viral growth. Actually, we didn't have that in our armoury, but we did have some method of revenue generation.
It's a fascinating asymmetry. I mean, I keep noticing over the decades the asymmetries between sort of banking and insurance, which in some ways are just sort of mirror images of each other. But as you point out, the likes of Tom, going back to your early chums, he's allowed to give away stuff for free without getting his wrist slapped. Well, he'll eventually get them slapped by the sort of VCs. But on the other hand, you guys aren't allowed to do it.
Yeah, and I guess it's a challenge, and it's to an extent a bit of a barrier to entry for the incumbents, which they've relied on for a long time.
Although, vice versa, if people manage to penetrate the marketplace, which hopefully you're doing in depth, it does mean that you start off with stronger growth, rather than being an app-only bank and suddenly, I've got 500,000 customers, or I've got 1 million customers. But actually, it's sort of, in a sense, it's sort of spindly growth because there's no fruit.
Yes, and that's kind of, certainly so far, been our experience that's what we're doing. I don't want to take anything away from the models of those other guys who have been incredibly successful and grown very well. But actually, I guess what we worked out was that banging the two together was quite a good idea.
Yes, well, this is my point. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from anyone, but to come back to the intro at the beginning, there was this idea back in the day that you should create product and create distribution. Well, maybe you're better at one than the other. I mean, you're always better at A or B by definition, and the app banks have certainly created distribution, so it makes sense to get together. So that brings us on to your 6 rules for success, of which the first one is move quickly, which I was winding you up over earlier, saying presumably moving quickly is better than moving slowly.
Yeah, so I guess for the listeners out there, before you do this, Mike makes you articulate what you're going to say.
And then destroys your confidence, and then turns the microphone on and is friendly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get your retaliation in first, it's called, I think.
So these 6 things are, they're not things that we have printed on the wall in the office, but they are things that we actively thought about when we were kind of setting up the partnership program, because we realised it was going to be so important. And I guess we've got kind of 2 flavours. So the first flavour is about doing things that the incumbents can't do. So, we thought it was really important to just really focus on how we could differentiate and pick the things that the big guys just couldn't do and make some obvious difference. So we kind of boiled that down, and there are 3 of the 6 are in that bucket. And then the second 3 things were things that we just thought were golden rules of doing partnerships and being partnerable. those have proved important and people value our approach to them.
Okay, so starting with the first half, which is the things that incumbents can't do, as I was saying, move quickly is one of them.
Yes. So very first thing that you do when you're starting a partnership program a couple of years back is you also go and speak to some partners and you ask them, I've noticed that you've got 100,000 users but no revenue. Perhaps we can talk about insurance. And they all said, yes, absolutely. We've thought about insurance as an obvious revenue generating opportunity for a long time. We went and talked to insert name of large insurer here about how to do it. And they said, okay, well, why don't you go away and get fully regulated? Then we'll start talking to you. Then it'll go through our board. That'll take 3 or 4 months. And then maybe we'll start building a product together and you can do a tech integration. And all of these businesses then just said, okay, well, we'll think about something else then. We'll generate revenue in some other ways. So we knew kind of coming into this that we would have to really focus on being fast. And what we did is actually laid out the reasons why it was a slow process and thought about how we could cut those. So for us, the 2 biggest ones, the first one was about regulation. It's kind of obvious in insurance that would be quite a big thing. So we actually worked quite hard in conversation with the FCA to understand how we could do a partner program without the partners being regulated and how we could manage the handoffs and the kind of relationships in a way that didn't require that. So that hurdle kind of disappeared and we saved 6 months straight away. And then the second bit was about the tech integration, which was really difficult with the big insurers. And I think we were always going to be better than them because we're a tech firm, but we actually spent a lot of time boiling it down such that a junior software engineer can get it done in an afternoon. That was an important thing. I think we'll talk a bit more about that second one later.
So, teasing you aside, it's not so much about move quickly, which is kind of bleeding obvious, but actually it's the much deeper process, which when it's done well, and I think being nice about my partner's Smart Pension, I think Will is one of the best people at that, not just because of Smart Pension, but Marina Flowers as well, where the flowers are actually dying when they're in transit. So you really got to get the logistics right, which is that the best thing you can do is to deconstruct and refactor the underlying business process. And if you've done that, then if you've got a small infrastructure, you can implement that to get a much shorter time to market. Nigel Verdon, again, previous podcast, was talking just about this in terms of signing up to global banking, orders of magnitude faster than you can otherwise. So just to give us a feel for that, I mean, in Urban Jungle's case, let's say, for the sake of argument, London Fintech Podcast wanted to partner up with you and offer people insurance.
Yeah, we can talk about that later, yeah.
Yes, talk about that later. Yes, offer insurance, and especially for all the sort of snowflakes listening in, they get upset quite a lot. Maybe I can offer them some sort of mental health insurance from sort of all the sort of things they have to hear on the podcast. How long would it take me to sort of, or take you to sort of let me have a little bit of a go and see how it works?
So we can go, and we have done this, from hello to live in a week. And that's what we think about as, that should be the kind of time it should take.
Which is pretty good going. We'll come on to the old school stuff later, but if you're talking about a week, then that isn't, as it were, the weakest link of the chain, because actually it might take me slightly longer than a week to trust you and get to know you and all that kind of stuff. So I like the idea you've got 2 sides of the coin. So then your next point was about being open to ideas.
Yes, so like any good business, we started, and I've already mentioned this, going and talking to customers and just asking them what they might want. And we kind of think about partners as customers actually in this world, even though they are distributing onto the kind of end customers. And what we realised really quickly is that they actually often wanted really different things. So we've got some people who just want to implement it as a very simple affiliate link and kind of bring customers through to us. At the most advanced level, we're talking to some of our partners about delivering in-context insurance.
And in-context insurance, for those people not entirely familiar with in-context insurance like myself?
Yes, so I may have even coined that phrase. What we mean by that is, so someone sees that you buy a bicycle, someone sees that you buy an engagement ring, that you pay your rental deposit. That's actually a very good time.
Oh, I see. So it's like the point of need financing.
Yeah.
So, when you're going to buy a bicycle, then if a P2P is doing a good white labelling, then actually there's some finance available and you don't even know it's from RateSetter or something like that.
Correct, yeah. And referencing your last podcast, with open banking, the number of organisations for whom that's true, who have access to that data, is about to explode. Maybe not tomorrow, but that's a particularly interesting thing that we kind of thought about.
Okay, so there's sort of various ways to dock with your spaceship.
Perhaps just to close off my point, so that had implications for the way we set things up. So we didn't say, we've got a partner program where you sell our products and you must sell them in this way. We actually don't think that would have worked at all. So when we built the program and built the architecture, we did it in a way with open APIs that effectively lets the partner kind of do what they like. So we set some guide rails that are driven by regulation, but they can deliver and offer the products however they like. And we think that's really important, particularly just because it lets them innovate in ways that we can't even think of.
So going back to your sort of back end and the point I made earlier, that one thing about the Insuretechs that's meant they've taken off is that the incumbents, be they insurers or reinsurers, are much more flexible about offering insurance, like out of a socket in the wall. You sort of plug into the socket. It's not the cable, it's not the electricity, but it's the insurance socket, and then the insurance comes to you. So in a way, talking of interfaces, would it be true to say that you're kind of an interface between the traditional insurance market, new takers of insurance who just need a more flexible way? They want to plug into a circle or a square or a triangle or a hexagon, and you can actually knock up a hexagon much faster than anybody else can.
Yeah, I think I'm going to follow your analogy through all the way. So we're probably wired directly into the grid, which is quite complicated. It took us a long time to build integrations with insurers. I'm sure it's a lot better than it was 5 or 6 years ago, but it's not easy, and it took us a long time. And we're, I guess, funneling that down such that we've got a socket with a few international adapters on it, such that we make that process much easier than it would be to go and work with the really big guys.
And it's one thing for the interesting dimension. I mean, being a management consultant, I'm sure you like these 2D charts, but there's this chart that's sort of got product along one dimension and consultancy along another. And if every time you deliver something it's different, then you're really in the sort of the tailor-made suit version. If you sell suits like Marks and Spencer and they're 34 regular, 36 regular or something like that, then you're selling a bunch of products. There is presumably, especially in a new firm, a certain degree of tension because someone knocks on the door, wants to do business with you, you all leap up and stand up and salute and get very excited by it. But before you know it, extending the metaphor, you've got a sort of 1,001 types of socket, which is a bit of a pain in the arse to maintain 1,001 different types of socket. And so actually, at a certain point in time, the being flexible, open to ideas, needs to be distilled into the importance, which I think is really underestimated, but the importance of being able to say no.
Yes.
Actually, guys, no, we could do that, but we don't. We do circle, square, triangle. We're really good at that. We don't do hexagon.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, this isn't one of my 6 principles, but we actually have a sort of internal rule that we will only do something for a partner if we believe that it would have value for more than that partner.
So you're avoiding the consultancy kind of trap, where every consultancy project is kind of slightly different from the previous one.
Exactly. That's not the business we're in. That's not kind of sustainable.
Yes. Well, I think this North Star of knowing the business you're in is really important because there's all this sort of blah, blah around product market fit and all that. It's all wonderful, but it's a bit like an old-fashioned radio dial. If you just keep twiddling it and finding new stations and every day you twiddle it,
yeah,
you never actually sort of stay anywhere. Good. Okay, so that's the open to ideas, but not being too open to ideas. I think it's important with all these kind of things to have the sort of Scylla and Charybdis. So, on the one hand, if you go too far in this direction, it's disadvantageous on the other. And you mentioned, of course, being developer-friendly and APIs and all that kind of stuff. And that's the interface of our day. So, amazingly enough, something about the old world and the old school and all that kind of stuff still appears to be relevant to young folks such as yourself. So going on to the old school, just partnership, forgetting computers and fintech and digital and all this kind of stuff, what have you distilled from a million years of culture to be your three big takeaways for partnering from a million years of Homo sapiens?
There's a reason we have this sort of old school list. I think so. The top three points are mostly about things that the incumbents can't do. I think the bottom three of the list are actually things that often startups fail to do, and that we've seen other businesses in fintech and outside, when they're trying to build partnership programs, they kind of ignore these things. That's why we focused on them. So the first one is about being available. So I think we've certainly seen businesses try to do similar stuff to us, where they've said, okay, well, we've got 2 founders and we work really hard and we've got some customer service and they can answer some calls and some queries. And actually, what we kind of realized quite early is if you're helping a partner be their revenue generating tool, so if you're the main reason they make money, if something goes wrong, and it will go wrong, definitely, you need to be available. You need to be there quickly and you need to be answering questions quickly. So we realized quite quickly that we should invest in that. So we hired someone to work on it full time. We hired a developer to work on it full time. The rest of the team also, dedicate some resource to it. But that kind of old school, we're on the end of the phone, which is often not true with tech businesses. I could probably name it for you. We always thought that was really important.
Yes, absolutely. So the corollary of being available is implicit or explicit there is creating the appropriate bandwidth to be able to service the relationship. And of course, why there's two sides to the coin is that tech doesn't exist in a vacuum. Were there no Homo sapiens is around, there would be no tech. And if something goes wrong in the tech or in the overall business, then it has to be a human being sorting it out. Prime examples being talking app-only banks. I mean, Monzo particularly publicised it, but they were all hit by it. The card processing partner fiascos of 2017, which historians will be writing about in 100 years' time. And no matter how many APIs you got and how many this is and that and how many techies and developers, oh shit, it's fucked up, oh my God. That actually takes management to do something about it, make decisions and, move your armies around.
Yes, absolutely. And we know that we're not the only option to work with. So if you handle those things badly, they are really good reasons for customers to look elsewhere. So it's absolutely the right thing, we think, to be obsessed by.
Yes, so it's a very good point, because along the spectrum of fintech, at the more tech end, there are people who just consider it as connecting computers or connecting programs, which of course is very important. And sometimes it can be almost just only that. But take a much bigger picture. I remember back in the day, having played with computers about 40 years ago for the first time, there was this great idea that you've got computers, the world will be terribly efficient and everyone can sort of work one day a week and all that kind of stuff. Whereas actually, surprise, surprise, what's happened is more and more people have been sucked into doing things with computers.
Yeah.
And as we all know, apps on our phone keep quotes upgrading, which is a euphemism of our time, and then they stop working, it doesn't work the same, and yada, yada, yada. So it's really important to, as you say, ensure that you can deliver the human bandwidth along with the technical bandwidth, be it sort of gigabytes or deals or something like that. And what you can't do easily in most cases, I think, in fintech, is the sort of wham bam, thank you spaceman kind of thing. Right, okay, we did a partnership today, right, do another one tomorrow, yeah. By the end of the month you've done 30 partnerships done, in inverted commas, and then the next month all hell breaks loose and your wife never sees you and you never sleep and you're a nervous wreck. I remember in a similar way actually about partnerships that when offshoring first appeared, there was this great idea, you offshore stuff, that'll sort it out. Yeah. That'll be cheaper, that's the job done. Okay, so people did that, literally, I'm not exaggerating, they literally did it. And then a bit later something goes wrong and they suddenly find out, oh no. So you can never entirely wash your hands of it. Okay, so then, rule number 5. I like the way you've stated these rules, actually. I should say to the listener that I'm being terribly unfair to you, because I did send you an email saying, look, say whatever you like, it's just a rule of thumb to me. So you've done notes to self, really, which I then sort of promptly tease, which should teach you a lesson of trusting no one, perhaps, especially sort of the old foxes. So your number 5 rule is be commercially aware, which is presumably better than don't be commercially aware.
So I guess we work with quite a big range of partners who are trying to do different things, and in fact in different sectors. So fintech is definitely one of our targets, but also prop tech, and I'm sure often for partnering businesses that will be the case. And to give you an example, there's some very big differences between them. So on one side we partner with big landlords who have loads of properties, and what they care about is actually having an insured tenant so that they don't have arguments with them about the deposit, about damaged goods. That kind of keeps them happy. They don't care about the revenue stream. It's more about reducing those arguments, keeping their properties full and having short vacant periods. On the other hand, you've got a fintech who has loads of customers but no way to monetize them, and the main thing for them is about their revenue model. Both of those businesses, one of them is a bit more traditional, asset-based, one of them is very modern, has a different brand. I think all we've just been very cognizant of is going into those conversations with our eyes absolutely open about what that business needs and what that business wants, and tailoring, just commercially to be honest, our offer to them such that it works for those needs. And I guess the theme, one theme that kind of comes through all of our points is not to just try and sell what we're offering, but to tailor that, as you said earlier, within reason, such that it works for the partner.
Yes, and hearing you speak about that, it's really just a question, I think, to summarise a little bit, of understanding what your partner wants in life, which is one of these things that can be assumed quite a lot, whether it's marriage, relationships, or business relationship, but even at a superficial level, as you say, you can group your partners into two, like the landlords have got these kind of set of desires, and the app-only bank's got those set of desires. But equally, you could then slice those categories down. These kinds of landlords have got actually these desires and slightly that. So it's really about trying to understand the other side, which comes back to, I think, what I was saying earlier about if you've got a week, basically sort of, to get the partnering done, then that kind of part of it, the tech part of it, isn't the constraint. It's much more, you getting to know the London Fintech podcast and finding out what I really want. Because I may say, actually, I think I want, insurance for snowflakes listening to the podcast who burst into tears and and then need sort of support. But actually, because you know the market better, in a dialogue with you help me discover what I want. It's this old sort of IT thing about what the customer said he wanted, what he really wanted, what they thought he wanted, what was delivered, yada, yada, yada.
What you sort of touch on there is that this can't happen in a vacuum. So you get something out there and give it a try and see how it works. It's not a one-shot game. You kind of need to be able to iterate, which requires talking to customers, asking them what they want and that sort of stuff.
Okay, and then the last point in your note to self, rather than principle, it was share learning. What does that one mean?
This actually speaks to your point about the sign up 30 partners in a month and get going point. Actually, it's very easy when you're thinking about a partner program to be actually kind of sales focused and think, where's the next partner coming from? Okay, I've signed those guys up, on to the next one. And actually, what we think is as important as that, if not more important, is helping the partners make it work for them. And we see our partners implementing our stuff in a huge variety of ways. Some of it works, some of it doesn't work at all. And by kind of sharing that learning between them and saying, well, why don't you try this? Or this is in completely the wrong part of your website, why don't you push it here? Actually, we can help both of us. And that is higher return for us than chasing the next partner. And that's kind of an important thing to remember.
Yes, and talking of bandwidth and thinking of my partners on the show, there's the question of one having the appropriate bandwidth oneself, but also there's the challenge of your partner having the appropriate bandwidth to get the most out of it. Let's say that your wife goes off and helps orphans in Uganda for 6 months. I mean, that's nice, but actually there won't be much bandwidth for the relationship to develop. And I think without telling too many tales out of school, as listeners probably work out, Blue Motor Finance and Smart Pension are incredibly successful organisations, incredibly busy and going somewhere fast. So there's plenty that I do to help them offline as well as online. But actually, one of the limiting factors is they're so bloody busy. There's a limit to how much I can sort of lob over the wall saying, hey guys, look, follow this one up. I think this is interesting. And all that kind of stuff. So actually, you need the bandwidth on your partner's side as well.
Yeah, and that kind of pays into how you select who you partner with. So we tend to find it's much more successful when we are important to that partner and our services make up an important part of their proposition, whether it is financially or just in terms of how the proposition works in its entirety. If we're important, then when we call, they do listen and they do move things around and it does work better. So exactly as you say, and that is also the flip side of our get going in a week thing. If some people are just tempted just to give it a go because it is really quick and easy. Actually, we do need to kind of prioritise and redouble our time on people where it is really important for them.
Yes, absolutely. And it occurs to me that an obvious question I didn't ask at the beginning was, how many partnerships do you guys have? Maybe because it's sort of partly confidential, but also I didn't necessarily think it's the right one, because I think the value of your network is each partnership, the quantity times the quality of that relationship. Like if in your own mind you scored them on a scale of 0 to 10, like a 9 out of 10 is a really good quality and 1 out of 10 or the buggers never pick up the phone and yada yada yada, it would be much more of a sum of something like quality times quantity is the value of your network, not just quantity.
Yes, and we already have some good ones, some bad ones, some medium ones, some big ones, some small ones. They all have their different features.
So just to wrap up on that one, actually, I thought your last point was share learning, but actually I thought that was a bit of a spoonerism, because if we flip it round, it covers the whole thing, which is learn sharing. So before we wrap up the show and hear a little bit more about Urban Jungle, we haven't heard very much at all, I'd like to thank all the listeners out there. I appreciate every one of you in all the countries in the world. There's now 173 countries in the world. If any of you ever go on holiday to Greenland, please download it, even just once over there, because I've got this huge white space on the map. I'd also like to thank my brand partners for the podcast. Blue Motor Finance combine extensive experience with a fresh and innovative approach. Blue's award-winning technology has supported over £500,000 of lending to over 50,000 customers. Smart Pension, who are fast, secure and free. Check out their UK workplace pensions at autoenrollment.co.uk. So in terms of Urban Jungle, Jimmy, maybe you'd just like to give the listeners 2 or 3 minutes on precisely what you do, what you're offering, and which of them out there should be checking you out and buying something from you, and maybe also on the point of partners, what kind of partners, if they're out there, should be calling you forthwith.
Yeah, absolutely, that would be great. So we're a fintech focused on renters, so if you're a renter, come and check us out at myurbanjungle.com and we'll hopefully help you get some rental insurance.
And when you say rental insurance, it's probably more clear to you than the average person.
So we cover people's contents when they're at home, we cover things like phones and bikes and rings and other things when out of the home, we cover people's liability to the landlord if they break the landlord's stuff.
And what I saw on whatever it was, FIFO, Trustpilot or something like this, was plenty of comments of people saying that you guys do this really well and the traditional market doesn't look after renters well, going back to management consultancy and gaps in the market.
Yes. So I guess almost going back to the beginning, why did we start the business? We were disgruntled renters who'd had really bad experience, particularly when we were living in a big shared flat of insurers, overpricing us, not kind of appreciating our risk. So we thought, especially given renting is exploding and the number of people unable to afford to buy a house is going up, it was a good area to focus on and do a much better job than the existing guys. I guess the second part of the ask is about partners and kind of what we've been talking about a lot today. So we mostly partner with two types of business. So first, fintech businesses that are kind of trusted fintech introducers or have quite an important financial role in their lives. And the second type of businesses are proptech businesses who play some role in the property transaction. So maybe they own the property itself, or they help people find properties, or housemates, or help people manage bills. And we partner with those businesses and we help them grow their income, as we've talked about today. So we always love to hear people who are kind of interested in partnering with us.
Good. Okay, well, that's all very clear, and I like the fact you've got a focused niche in terms of it's very clear what you're doing, helping the renting generation. And teasing apart, I like the point that you're making on these partnership things, and in particular, I think the overall thing, which is that it sounds easy, and when you're putting a PowerPoint pack together and raising money, we're going to go to partnerships. How hard can it be? Well, it's actually a bit trickier, like most things. And you've clearly got some very blue chip fintech heroes as angels, and I wish you every success in the future, growing your partnerships and growing your direct channels as well. So thanks for that, Jimmy.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on.
Thanks for listening. If you have consulting, advisory/non-exec or media needs in the FS or fintech space, get in touch with me at mike@londonfintechpodcast.com.
We could sit in a vendor all day, watching the firelight dance, watching the firelight dance. We could walk in the mountains before dawn, watching a happy moon ride, watching a happy moon ride. Come away from the city, with the tarmac so dead and the people so sad. Come away from the city, with the faces so grey, with the pain of the everyday. We are wild like the mountains and the trees. Can you see what I mean? Can you see what I mean? We fit in between the earth and the sky. Kiss the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye. The city goodbye. Watch the firelight dance with me. 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 Watch the firelight dance.